बंद करो।
Friends, welcome to all of you from the Raza Foundation. These are difficult times. We are all homebound, locked down. This is the year for the birth centenary of Syed Haider Raza. And though we had planned a lot many things, including an exhibition which should have opened last night in Pompidou in Paris, most things have to be postponed. But happily, we are able to do a series of lectures on Raza online by some of the experts and persons who have known him, his work, and his life. We have had the first lecture by the historian Sudhir Chandra, and today we welcome one of the most acclaimed authorities on Raza, Dr. Geeti Sen, who did the first seminal book on Raza way back in 1997. And a new edition has recently come out in an expanded and edited form. Dr. Geeti Sen is an eminent art historian and art critic who has written on many artists and many trends, including on women artists, on Ganesh Pine, on Akbarnama. She has been an art critic in the Times of India, in India Today, and remains at this late stage of her life actively engaged with what is happening in art. So welcome you, Dr. Geeti Sen. She is going to talk about Raza's explorations on reality. She is, as I told you, one of the finest and the most well-informed critics on Raza. So, floor is yours, Dr. Geeti Sen. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Shri Ashok Vajpayee. Friends, Shri Vajpayee, Shri Sanjeev Chaubey, I would like to begin by thanking the Raza Foundation for giving me this opportunity to present my ideas today. I'm deeply honored because the Raza Foundation has brought our attention to many different aspects of Raza's work and his life. The intrinsic relation of Raza's work to the environment, to nature, to music and poetry, to the colors of India can never be underestimated. The expanse of Razas Vision, his own changes in style over 60 years, I think it's about 60 years of work, cannot be covered in this one talk. So my focus will be on Raza's relationship to the environment. his inspiration from the environment, and how this could help lead us to a sense of wholeness. I met Raza Saab first in 1972. Thereafter, I think it was 1984, I interviewed him for the India International Center, and we will carry a small quote by him from that interview. Finally, I think the years that were really precious were 1988 or 89, 1991, where for 3 consecutive summers, I visited France. I met Raza and his wife Janine and stayed with them in Gorbio for 8, 9 days at a time and watched his process of work, watched how the Bindu evolved in the critical years, those years of the 1980s, 90s, when this was actually happening. I was fortunate. I lived at the right time. I was fortunate to meet Raza. So, Raza never had any apology for repetition of the Bindu because he saw it in so many different ways. For him, as he said, it was like a japmala, where with repetition it acquired intensity, it acquired new meaning, it acquired resonance. And equally, I have to say that I have no apologies when I talk to you today to go back to my research many years ago. Because sometimes when you go through old material, new ideas fertilize, new ideas are born, or perhaps you have a new vision, new way of looking at them. So, to come to my talk, increasingly, I would say that there has been a new perception in looking at reality, a different paradigm, if you like, with fundamental changes that have moved away from the mechanistic or mechanical view of the world to a more holistic conception of the universe. The ecological imperative of our times connects art to this web. All professional spheres, whether it be philosophy or physics, microbiology, the social sciences, we have all been made aware of the need, the acute awareness that the earth needs to be sanctified, to be made whole again. In what way can modern art help us to restore to us this sense of sanctity? Traditionally, in India, art has remained in communion with nature. From primeval times, her rivers, her trees, her mountains were each personified and worshipped. I could remind us of 2 myths from the Purans. The first is about Prithvi. Prithvi, who was restored to her rightful position, rescued from the ocean by Bhagirath, by Varaha. The second story is about Bhagirath and his penance for over 1,000 years, when finally the Ganga was persuaded to come down from heaven to earth, to flow down from the Himalayas down to the ocean. and to complete the ecological balance. For Raza, nature provided a vital, a primary source of inspiration. While in India in the 1940s, he had painted the landscape of Kashmir, the Ghats at Nasik and Omkareshwar. Living in Madhya Pradesh, brought up in Mandla, he was well aware and he spoke about the scorching sun blazing over villages and the earth. All these left their impress on his work. In his later sensibility, he developed a very conscious, acute awareness of his Indian sensibility. In these years, he was living in France. And this had profound consequences on his art. I would quote him from an interview held in 1984, where he says, "A human being is living in relation to nature, to the universe. In our modern times, we are losing this contact. I dearly wish that whenever I come to India, I can breathe those deep, profound sources, this enormous gift to man, with all the resources more rich than in the sophisticated atmosphere of a city." End of quote. Raza's later works were not studies from nature. They were, in every sense, metaphors of the universe, of this and some more. But right now, I want to mention the formal elements that he used in his work: the circle, the square, the triangle, horizontal lines, vertical lines, diagonal lines. These created for him the elements of nature. There is actually precedence in texts, in ancient texts, that also suggest the circle, the line was used. I would like to quote here a very short quote from Pipalada's work of the Vastu Sutra Upanishad, which shows in its insights remarkable parallels. It says, for instance, first, a circle is made. The circle is the all, that is, it is the universe. The breath of life is contained in its form, even as the mind is in man. The circle is time. As we know, the concept of Indian time is cyclical. The circle is time, according to the Vastu Veda. The support of the circle, listen to this, the support of the circle is the immortal, the Bindu, in its firm position, like the Atman in man. End of quote. In Indian thought, the Panchatattvas were considered to be the raw material for everything that composed the universe. Raza, as he says and explicitly mentions, uses through bold colors, 5 colors of black, white, red, yellow, and blue, the primary elements of the universe, the Panchatattvas. I will quote him once again, and we will understand through this quote, his own process of work. He says, the process is akin to germination. Germination? He's talking about a painting, but he's referring to what he calls the earth-seed relationship, of the seed taking birth in the soil, in the earth, and growing up into a plant, into a tree. So with art. The obscure black space is charged with latent forces aspiring to fulfillment. Like the universal order of the earth-seed relationship, the original form of the Bindu emerges and unfolds itself in the black space. All inherent forces unite. A vertical line intersects a horizontal line, engendering energy and light. Contours appear and colors: white, yellow, red, and blue. And along with the original black, they compose the color spectrum of the visible world. Then he says, the heartbeat of a painting depends on the right orchestration of these elements and their variations. He says, I'm skipping some, the highest perception is of an intuitive order, where all human faculties participate, including the intellect. The language of form imposes its own inner logic and reveals itself with infinite variations. The mind can perceive these mysteries only partially. This is total bliss, and it defies analysis. So what am I doing here in front of you? I'm trying to analyze. But I'm quoting from Raza Saab, because he describes, he makes us aware of his own process of thought and how it is akin to germination. Raza's process in painting follows what he describes as the dictates of an inner logic. That is, he does not give total credit, if you want to call it that, to the mind or the intellect. It is of an intuitive order. His inspiration comes not from being aware of not from planning, though we think that every work of his that we see is well planned. He believes it comes from an inner dictate, from a logic. He returns to the abstraction of art in ancient India and elsewhere, not just modern art, but art over centuries of belief and practice. The use of symbols is sanctified by an ancient legacy of visual abstraction. Geometric symbols, as we know, are used as yantras. They are used not only in tantric perception, but they're used to help us to meditate. The Sufis, Islamic calligraphy, depends again on visual abstraction to aid the devotee to contemplate the divine. Sufis have written on the significance of light as a spiritual substance. This mystical experience of light finds concrete expression in Islamic architecture, where sunlight filters through jalis. Stone screens are carved in wonderful patterns, creating a play of light and shadows on walls, ceilings, floors. Geometry, number, and harmony form the objective language shared by several religions, not just Islam or Hinduism. They are found in the sacred art of Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, Shintoism, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. In almost every civilization, sacred or celestial geography envisages the universe in terms of geometry as the only means by which the planetary spheres can be mapped. So, what do we say about abstraction? There's great precedence for it. There is an ancient legacy in India. It is not new. Unlike the West, where really abstraction came into its own in the early 20th century, in India, it was an ancient practice. It was well known, rehearsed, understood. So, what Raza was going back to, apart from the formal training and abstraction that he acquired in Paris, he was going back to a much more ancient way of returning us to the earth. So, in modern art, the French artist Paul Cezanne, who remained a pioneer in this direction of abstraction and who became an inspiration for many artists, and that included Raza, he could write, I quote, "Our art must render the thrill of nature's permanence, along with her elements, the appearance of all her changes. It must give us a taste of her eternity." What is there underneath? He means underneath the painting. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Everything, you understand. End of quote. It was the photographer on his visit to India, Henri Cartier-Bresson, who met Raza in 1948. And he said to him, "You're gifted, but you should construct your painting. Study Cezanne. Study Cezanne." One of his landscapes of the Kashmir Valley earned Raza the gold medal from the Bombay Art Society in 1948. In that same year, he took his diploma from the J.J. School of Art. But most significantly, it was in 1948 that the original 6 founding members of the Bombay Progressives met to have their first exhibition in the city. This evoked praise and criticism in their search for a new vocabulary in art. They were evolving a bold new language, using the human figure to make their revolutionary statements. But Raza was different. In India, the focus had always been on the human figure. Yet, among the 6 progressives, Raza resisted the temptation to return to the human figure. Gaitonde told me once, and he said it very casually, He was, in fact, with Raza, a student at the same time at the JJ School of Art. Gaitonde said, Raza painted only landscapes. Always. He didn't say always, he said, Raza painted only landscape. So, unlike many contemporaries of his time, contemporary artists, and that included Gaitonde, because I tried to appreciate and understand the work of Gaitonde, Raza spoke about his major sources of influence. For some years after he arrived in Paris, his main theme was the French landscape, where trees, mountains, villages, churches become important motifs. He says, my paintings were slowly changing. The constructions by Cezanne were haunting me. In 1962, he was invited to California, to the University of California, to teach at Berkeley in the summer. It was an exhilarating experience for him. But it was also the time where he found that he shared affinities with the work of Hans Hofmann, who was living in the United States. There, he says, I discovered the works of Sam Francis and Mark Rothko, and these came as a revelation. So let us not forget that Mark Rothko, who took his own life, who created the most wonderful, most amazing abstract images, was one of the primary sources for Raza Saab at a certain time. It was at this time, I think, in the mid-60s, when he visited Berkeley, that a major change took place in his work. In an interview which I held much later in 1990, Raza had said to me, I realized that my eyes were focused inwards, and there was an imperative need. My apology. My eyes were focused outwards, and there was an imperative need to look within. Thus began a transformation in my vision and in my work. Thereafter, visual reality, the aim to construct a tangible world, receded. In its place, there was a preoccupation with evoking the essence, the mood of places and of people. They were expressed through emotive colors and forms, which became increasingly more gestural. For instance, his painting titled Summer, in tones of yellows, I'm quoting him, expresses a certain mood of saturation. La Mer, 1974, captures the feel and the texture of water. La Forge, the furnace, 1971, created the sensation of heat in a burning furnace where molten metal is being cast. My colors no longer responded to the original, but rather to the mood and the climate of that experience. Memory began to play a role in recalling the experience and the mood of a situation. Paintings such as Rajasthan and Saurashtra summoned up that quality of light, patterns, and textures, as well as colors embedded in my mind. End of quote. So we come now to what Raza has just mentioned. The question, the quality of memory. So important for him. So important for all those artists who have left the country of their origin, their birth, their training, their experience. Memory plays a fascinating role in that it feeds on these images of the past and refines, if you like, distills the experience for us. All the more if we are separated in time and in place. Raza lived in France, as we know, for over 50 years, from 1950 to 2006. His paintings, such as Rajasthan, we are aware of 3 paintings titled Rajasthan, Saurashtra, Satpura, suggest his impassioned involvement with the country of his birth. A lot of research has been done on memory. Perhaps the most well known is the work of Marcel Proust, the French writer, who writes of it as La recherche du temps perdu, the research of time that is gone, time that is lost, perdu. Experiments conducted with the Tibetan people, or for that matter, any people in exile, will show that for them, the past is more vividly real than the present. They recreate it through their images, their folklore, their songs, through their mandalas, which mark out for them their sacred space. Take the case of Ritvik Ghatak from Bengal, whose films recreate the idea of Sonar Bangla, that part of what was then called East Pakistan and is now Bengal. It was left behind in the traumatic partition of India and Pakistan. Take the images by Jogin Chaudhary, for whom the past was recreated in a series of 52 paintings, which he called all of them reminiscences of a dream. In these paintings, in Jogen's paintings, shapes and smells and sounds were recreated from his childhood of Aam, Kathal, March, Poddophool, the mango, the jackfruit, the fish, the lotus. These images float in memory, and they float suspended on the canvas. In each case, there is an imperative need, as explained or put by Hegel, a need to return to that lost paradise, to that state of being which Hegel describes as the state of innocence. Raza brought to his images conceptual thought of India, as well as the techniques of formalism he acquired in France. Beginning with his return to India in 1959 and continuing through the 1960s through to the 1980s, Raza made several visits to India. Exhibitions of his works were held at Gallery Kemold in Bombay in 1976, 1979, 1984, 1988, and 1990, as well as that important exhibition which was held in Bhopal in 1978. It has not been noticed, really, that for 15 years, Raza did not have a single show and exhibition in Paris, although he lived there. His attention was engaged elsewhere. In his journeys to India, he'd begun a search for the essential truth or for his own tradition. If there's no truth, there is at least tradition. And his paintings raise that question: who am I? As in miniature paintings, Raza would inscribe, I think only from the 1980s, he would inscribe a verse in his paintings. He had inscribed, for instance, a verse from Kabir on the invitation to exhibition in Bombay. I think this verse is significant, and therefore I quote it. मेरे मेरा इसमें कुछ नहीं, जो कछु है सो तोर, तेरा तुझ कुक सोमते कहा लगत है मोर. Translated: nothing in this is mine. Whatever is, it is all yours. In offering you what is yours, I wonder, what is mine? We come to the last talk, the last part of my talk, and that is on the Bindu. What led the Bindu to surface with such clarity of vision? We know that Raza made several experiments, several attempts to find a focal point. And as it has been said, Raza had been painting the Bindu ever since the 1950s when he painted the Black Sun. But it was only in the late 1970s or 1980 that the Bindu resurfaced with such clarity, with such beautiful insight. At a point, it emerges a time in his personal history when he had been returning to India, as I've mentioned, and he was obsessed with retracing his Indian identity. This was at a point when he was mapping the sacred territory of the mandala. And as Raza mentioned somewhere, mandala, the word mandala, is related in sound to Mandla, the place where he was brought up in Madhya Pradesh. A bindu, a circle within a square, a circle with concentric rings set against dense black, expanding round and round and round, expanding, energies flowing. A black, dense circle vibrating within a red square. There are many other examples. Within this space, the radiant Bindu becomes an icon for meditation. This central image, the Bindu, becomes the leitmotif in Raza's work. Every artist develops a vocabulary of symbols, a language, growing in meaning. This becomes, it was always there, but it becomes more specific with art in the 20th century. Raza informs us that, I quote, my painting titled Bindu, 1980, was shown in Delhi at the Indian Triennale. It was painted in acrylic on canvas within a square frame. This painting was exhibited along with the larger painting in a horizontal format titled Ma, 1981, in which the central focus is again the large, black, and opaque Bindu. The Bindu. There are so many aspects to the Bindu. As Raza says, my earlier Bindus were not vibrating. They were dense, solid, as pure form. Later, the Bindu appeared as concentric circles of energy, expanding. Still later, they began moving through space as the sun moves across the sky. Jala Bindu, 1990, explores the same idea, but uses only one of the 5 elements, water. With painted in blues, this represents for me the female or feminine aspect. With the Bindu, I discovered that a whole series, climates of thoughts, can be created. Bindu Panchatattva demonstrates the 5 elements of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. I've interpreted the universe in terms of 5 primary colors: black, white, red, blue, and yellow. In recent years, my interpretation of the Bindu has focused on the beach, the seed, the minuscule point that is energy condensed. In Bija of 1994, the diagonals are the dynamics of life, radiating upwards from the black circle at the center. And the bija, the seed, can be split into 2 in its embryonic form to grow organically as the tree grows seed from seed in the earth. Then he goes on. I have no apology for my repetition of the Bindu. With repetition, you gain energy and intensity, as is gained through the japmala or the repetition of a word or a syllable, until you achieve a state of elevated consciousness. In Raza's paintings, I would like to conclude, there is implicit a sense of timelessness. A timelessness that is all pervasive, which brings a different meaning to his pictures. There is no reference anymore to a particular place or a time or a season, to the expression of a mood of a day, the ragamalas that he was influenced by so deeply, to the expression of a mood of day or evening, or to any climate of thought. Instead, he has abstracted from nature, its essence, its deeper implications for mankind. This, I feel, becomes Raza's most significant contribution to modern art. When art plays a role to restore us to the wholeness, to the sanctity of the universe. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer questions that Ashokji would like to put or any other comments.
No, I mean, if any listeners who would like to ask any questions, they're free, there's time. Please go ahead. Sanjeev, is there a way in which a person can ask a question?
मैं वेट कर रहा हूँ, जैसे ही आता है मैं रिफ्लेक्ट करूंगा, आपकी स्क्रीन पे आ जाएगा.
अच्छा, ठीक है. While we wait for the questions, let me express my gratitude to Geeti for very enlightening talk. The enigma of Raza remains an enigma in many ways, and yet many of us have been trying to unravel the wonder, the mystery that he was and that he created through his art. And more importantly, as you concluded, saying that his contribution through art is to restore a sense of sanctity, a sense of reverence, perhaps a sense of
Wholeness.
immanence in nature and environment. That, as we are currently suffering from an endemic, which is perhaps born out of our unconcern for environment. But Raza was, in that sense, able to bring art to a level of reflection about these things, to provoke us to not only think of art, but also think of the larger issues which impinge on the human condition. And as you said, again, more importantly, that increasingly his art liberated itself from the constraints of time and moved towards what one might call it a kind of a timelessness. He was no longer, as I once told him,
or a time.
Yes. Now here is a question: what do you think about the role of textuality in Raza's work, in the parliament of his paintings and word and image, which is in the opposition? Well,
Manish, this is a very, very difficult question because I am a non-political person. And all the words have you used, the parliament of his paintings, which is in the opposition, I'm afraid I don't understand. Perhaps you will explain. Perhaps you could explain it because I'm afraid I don't understand. And I never saw Raza's work in terms of opposition. I think what I've tried to show today is that there was a development and that he turned from the outward expression to the inner expression. There was a time when he went to California in the 60s, at that time when he was talking about seasons and day and night and moods. And then he moved away from that and he moved on. And he moved on to a most, as Ashokji has just explained again, has explained how Raza moved into a series that were beyond time, that encapsulate all of time, and that take us to the world beyond. He keeps his feet on the earth, planted. The question of the seed, the bija, the earth, all these are important. But he also lifts us. That, as you said, is the mystery of Raza Sahib. I'm sorry I can't answer your question, Manish. It's too complicated. Sabah has a question. Thank you, Sabah. Thank you for all the questions and the comments that have come up. I really appreciate.
Keki Daruwala has already complimented you on your talk. So has Sabah Hassan.
Monica.
And, yes, Monica Sheikh. Yes. One other idea that has always occurred to me, that Raza took a path of modernism in his work, which was so different from the usual path that modernist stance took, namely the path of disruption, dislocation, fragmentation. Quite contrary to all these well-known aspects of the modern, Raza took the other modern, the celebrative, celebration of life, the harmony possible in life. And therefore, I have been wondering whether he was not trying to articulate, although without claiming to be doing so, a kind of an alternative modernism, which was celebrated, which was full of harmony and peace, and which yearned for timelessness. I once told Raza that you have forgotten history because your eyes were always set upon eternity. And he sort of laughed at it.
I think
now there's a question. Was he inspired by Vedanta? Mr. Swagat Boshuas.
I'm afraid, again, inspired by Vedanta in the sense that, yes, by the abstraction of Vedanta, by the fact that Vedanta lifts us to a different level. But I would not say that Raza was inspired by any, at least in my several discussions with him, the question of any philosophy of this nature never came up. My own understanding of Raza was that it was unlikely that he dipped into this kind of philosophy, but I may be wrong. Sorry, no good.
No, if you look at his diaries, which ran into several volumes,
yes,
he used to note down whatever appealed to him. This included elements from Indian philosophy, but they also included Rilke's poems, what Paul Valery has said, what Gandhiji has said, what Vinoba Bhave has said, what some Upanishadic saying would be there. So his sources were very varied, and you cannot pin them to a philosophical source.
And there is no one
whether Vedanta or whatever. Yeah. Yes. Well, Kiran Sehgal is also complimenting you.
Thank you, Kiran. Thank you. Thank you.
Are there
I would like some questions, and I can. I'm afraid I can't answer on politics because I frankly don't think that Raza was interested in politics. If I may say so, he was above it. He was above the politics of the day. His mind was elsewhere.
No, I don't think Manish is exactly asking you a political question. He's only phrasing it
Couched it,
in a
couched it in political language. Yes.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. The question is, was there any contrary element incorporated by Raza within his oeuvre? That is, was there an inclusiveness uh, in which the contrary element would also find a place?
Well,
That is, I think, as I understand the question.
as you have pointed out yourself, uh, Ashokji, you pointed out how Raza brought a different kind of perspective to contemporary or to modern art, as it was
Yeah,
called at that time. So
yeah,
he posed. I mean, he didn't. A lot of a lot of modern art was negative. I mean, it mirrored the civilization in which we live. I think, in that sense, Raza's work is philosophical because he takes us beyond the immediate to what we can aspire to what can become uh, the evolution. And you mentioned that his approach to modern art was really quite different, and certainly he stood apart from the other members of the Bombay Progressives. Are we watching the time now? Is it time to end? So I would like you to do the concluding remarks, and I would like to thank everybody for listening, and I hope we've had an enjoyable session. I certainly have. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Geeti Sen, for this very interesting talk. We hope to continue the series, and we hope to have soon a conversation with the major Indian painter and a close friend of Raza, uh, Krishan Khanna, very soon. Also, we hope to feature Dr. Homi Bhabha from Harvard University to uh, speak. Yashodhara Dalmia, who has recently done a biography of Raza, and Rubina Karode, who has also been thinking about Raza's works deeply. So we hope to feature them all as the times go by, and perhaps we'll have other people from Bombay elsewhere. So thank you very much for joining in this series. We will inform you about the next one uh, as soon as we finalize it. And thank you, Dr. Geeti Sen, once again. And thank you, all the listeners, once again.
Thank you. Goodbye. Good evening.